Welcome, Web of Wires! The next generation of zombie games is creeping closer, and they're rising up fast. Zombie games have always had a rough history with ups and downs again, but this revival feels a little different.
Zombie games have had a long history. Anywhere from horror, to story, to multiplayer, to high score, and even typing, there is most likely a zombie game tie-in. But even though it existed in the early days of gaming, it didn't really start to pick up until Halloween of 2008, with titles like Left 4 Dead and Dead Space launching only a month apart from each other. And from there, the zombie genre exploded, at least according to Google Trends. If you revisit any 7th generation console today, you're most likely going back to play a game with zombies in it to some capacity. I like putting zombie games into 3 categories. You have the single player games, the multiplayer games, and the games that could be anything but zombies, but ooh, would you look at that, free money just for me. The single player scene was the first to really grow, with Half-Life and Resident Evil setting the stage. But to show off this new hardware, Dead Rising showed the possibilities of zombie games moving forward. Tons of enemies, one small shopping center. Then game companies looked at that and said, I can do that too. Dead Island, Call of Duty, Left 4 Dead, did you notice these are all multiplayer? And with this came the zombie multiplayer craze. It turns out that co-op zombie games with large hordes are super fun. So every zombie multiplayer game had to be a 4-player co-op based shooter. But really, these games weren't just banking on the genre's popularity. These were games banking on being a good game in a flooded genre, which is where the meat of the 7th generation comes from. Games that were there for the money. Kinda. Lots of these games are good, but it didn't really have to be zombies. Games like Typing of the Dead. A typing zombie game. It's just Mario teaches typing, but Mario never taught the word Lollipop Chainsaw, Zombie Driver HD, Plants vs. Zombies. They all followed the zombie trend. And I want to make this clear. I'm not talking bad about Rock of the Dead. I'm not talking bad about any of these games. But they didn't really need to be zombies. But it all started getting out of hand when these games added zombies as side content to get a little extra in their own pockets. Borderlands, Red Dead Redemption, these are not zombie games, but they flooded the market with something it didn't really need. I don't think anybody out there was asking for a zombie Yakuza or Ninja Gaiden, but they exist, so boo-hoo, I guess. On the plus side, this little zombie trend going on ended pretty well. It had some amazing titles released as people started getting tired of zombies. The Last of Us and Telltale's The Walking Dead released. These were massive titles that went right back to their roots of the genre. A good, well-told story throughout a dystopian zombie-littered world. None of that horde stuff, they just went back to being scary. And from 2013 and onward, the genre was pretty much over except for a couple sequels releasing that were left in development. I find it a little ironic that zombies as a whole, from a writer's perspective, can be interpreted in many ways, with one of them being mindless crowds trying to infect more and more people. So in a way, the zombie game idea was a zombie itself. Copy after copy, zombie this, zombie that. For that one person 31 shots into the video for every time I say zombie, call an ambulance because the zombie game craze took a different creative direction just a couple years later. Drink up. Around 2015, the genre had a small resurgence. Rather than companies taking advantage of the trend didn't really exist anymore. And because of this, zombies were back to good, unique experiences. We saw the first example of this with Dying Light, an open-world survival game drawing similarities to both Dead Island and, oddly enough, Mirror's Edge. And I mean, it makes sense. Dead Island was the last game they developed, so all they had to do was add some parkour. Dying Light shaped the genre forever, proving that new ideas were still possible for flat-screen experiences. On top of this, a new type of technology was just introduced: virtual reality. We saw our first little teaser into new possibilities with Arizona Sunshine, a zombie game made from the ground up for room-scale VR. With the HTC Vive, Oculus Rift, and PSVR 1 on the rise, it finally felt like something big could be coming up. But once flat-screen games started showing up in VR for the first time, either official or modded by the community, it proved we had only seen the surface of what's possible. From here, the ideas of what's possible with zombies in VR spread. You have a couple games here and there that were just games with zombies. Resident Evil 7 was a big hitter for the original PSVR when it released, but other promising titles like Half-Life Alyx pushed what was considered janky, messy, hard to control, honestly just normal VR. It took its own approach towards solving VR's biggest issues and attempted to bring the technology more mainstream. And still, to this day, it is regarded as one of the best games in headset 3 years later. Boneworks was the first zombie VR game with proper working physics engines. Seriously, this was really unique for the time. But I think the best example for what's to come is The Walking Dead. As always, it's an IP licensed out to developers. They had a TV show spin-off and a standalone game. The TV show spin-off just sucked. It was as generic zombie VR game as it gets. But Saints and Sinners, this is where VR shines. In most games, you have basic gamer laws. Avoid this border, swap with inventory buttons, click squares to attack, basic stuff. But Saints and Sinners added more realism. On a flat screen, pulling out a backpack to organize and find items may seem clunky. It worked in something like Resident Evil 4, but failed in Zombie U. Possible, but not always necessary. Instead of a cloud that comes by to kill you if you're not back by a certain time, it's a horde of zombies you can fight off if you want. Weapons have different sharpness to them, swing easier, have different durability. It makes every weapon you own feel new, even if you have 5 of the same weapon in your backpack. And it's in this game where the zombie genre starts to innovate again. Today, the genre has seen a massive leap in creativity and innovation. Most people say we hit the technical top of what there is to offer with the PS5, Series X, and S. Outside of load times, it's just a higher fidelity version of older hardware, and for the most part, it can be true. But out of any genre to innovate the fastest, I argue zombies have it best. Sure, we still have those games that just kinda suck like Back 4 Blood, but since then we saw the Callisto Protocol, Resident Evil 8, Dying Light 2, State of Decay 2, with remakes of Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space releasing in 2023. So even if these new games aren't the world's best, the teams behind them are interested in creating new experiences, new sequels, and new franchises with the technology that we have today. So even though we may be going back to the original roots of zombie games, failing to innovate in areas already explored, you can't learn unless you fail. And I'm glad that out of all the people willing to fail, it's the minds behind those who exploded the market with creativity and innovation in a trend that needed it the most.
With older teams coming back together, a lot of ambitious titles promised for the future, and virtual reality showing off its first big potential, there's a lot to be excited for. So for the person 43 drinks into this video, I hope you're feeling a little better, because the future is looking great.
I'm dead, darling, I'm so dead.